brave-faced stoicism through treatment.
The crystal shattered. The sound died in the Windsor State dining room. Every guest went still. Catherine stood at the head of the table. She looked at the security team. She pointed a finger directly at Laura Lopes. Her eyes were like ice. She demanded an immediate escort out. The room gasped. Camilla turned deathly pale. The king sat in stunned silence. What secret forced the Princess of Wales to take such drastic action? Why did a royal dinner turn into a battlefield of hidden fury? The cameras cut to black. The doors locked. This was not just a dinner party. It was a declaration of war. In this video, we expose the truth behind the royal meltdown that shook the monarchy, the shattered crystal. The Windsor State dining room was cold. The air felt thin and sharp. Every single guest held their breath in the quiet. The flowers were fresh and very expensive. The wine was poured in sparkling crystal, but the tension ruined the entire night. Catherine sat at the head table. She watched Camilla with cold, hard eyes. Her expression was hard as stone. The king looked down at his plate. He avoided eye contact with everyone present. The silence was loud and heavy here. Then the moment arrived without any warning. A wine glass slipped from a shaking hand. It crashed against the floor very hard. The sound echoed off the stone walls. It traveled straight into the high rafters. Every guest stopped eating right then. The king paused with his silver fork. He looked up with genuine, deep worry. Camilla sat beside him in total shock. She went pale under the bright lights. She looked at the woman nearby. Laura Lopes sat in the center. Her face remained calm and very still. It was too calm for any comfort. Catherine stood up from her chair. The movement was sharp and very fast. The security team reacted almost instantly. They moved toward the main table quickly. They did not move for the king. They did not move for Camilla. They moved for the woman alone. Catherine pointed her hand with total focus. Her finger remained steady and cold. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to scream loudly. Her words cut through the room. They sliced through the thick, heavy silence. She spoke a clear and direct command. The guards were trained for dark threats. They were not ready for this moment. They reached the side of Laura Lopes. She looked surprised by the quick approach. She looked at her own mother. Camilla looked away toward the dark wall. She could not stop this event. She could not speak a single word. The king remained frozen in his seat. He watched the scene with wide eyes. He did not try to help. Catherine remained standing like a true queen. She looked like a fierce, ready warrior. Her posture was absolutely perfect today. Her face held no sign of pity. This was a very calculated strike. It was a surgical, precise removal process. But what was the real problem here? Why did this happen right now? Why choose this specific public place? The tension was thick and very real. The guests were terrified to move. They wanted to leave the room immediately. But the heavy doors were locked tight. They were trapped inside this night. This was not a simple dinner party. This was a public trial of power. The guards surrounded the seated guest. They asked her to rise up. She did not move for a second. She looked at Catherine once more. A whisper passed between them both. It was soft and very, very quick. Nobody heard the secret words spoken, but the effect was truly immediate. Laura Lopes stood up very slowly now. She did not scream or cry out. She took her small silk bag. She walked toward the heavy wooden exit. The guards followed her out closely. The room felt lighter after she left, but the damage remained in the air. The king looked down at nothing. He stared at his empty plate. He did not eat any more food. Camilla looked at the closed, dark door. She looked at the empty space. She looked broken and very small. Catherine sat back down with grace. She picked up her silver fork. She took a bite of her food. Her hands were still and calm. She looked around the entire room. She made sure they all saw her, and made sure they all understood everything. The order had been restored fully. But the cost was very high indeed. Something had changed in the room. The foundation was cracked and weak. The monarchy had been tested hard. The guests were still very quiet. They waited for the next move. Would the king speak to them all? Would he defend his own wife now? Would he challenge the powerful princess? Silence stretched out for a long time. It lasted for a full long minute. It felt like an entire hour. Then the king finally stood up. He walked toward the dark, locked exit. He walked toward the heavy doors. Camilla followed him out of sight. The dinner was over for them. The guests were left all alone. They were alone with their thoughts. They were alone with the secret. What did Catherine say to her? What was the whisper that worked? What was the truth behind the anger? The cameras were off by now. The Two Courts Windsor is not just a palace made of stone. It is a silent, sprawling battlefield for the soul of the monarchy. Two distinct camps exist within these walls today. One side is deeply orderly and razor-sharp. The other side is tangled in old shadows. The divide between them is now absolute. Catherine runs her office with cold military precision. Every single detail she touches has a clear purpose. She demands total loyalty from everyone in her circle. Her team never misses a single beat. They operate with perfect clockwork efficiency at all times. This is the new royal standard she built. This standard puts her at direct odds with the older guard. They represent a different time and a different set of rules. They rely on soft influence and long-standing social connections. They dislike the rigid way Catherine operates her court. She sees them as outdated and dangerous relics. This friction defines the current royal atmosphere. You can feel the tension in every hallway. It hangs in the air like a thick, heavy fog. The courtiers know exactly which side they serve. There is no mixing between these two opposing worlds. They pass each other with cold, averted eyes. Every meeting feels like a dangerous game of chess. Catherine never raises her voice to win a fight. She does not need to resort to public scenes. Her power comes from quiet, calculated, and direct moves. She builds her influence through sheer force of will. She has hardened her heart to protect her position. She is ready for any challenge that comes. Catherine has faced many turbulent moments in the royal family. Hence, she was able to know the tricks and plans of the Parker Bowles circle. The Parker Bowles circle sees things very differently indeed. They have spent decades surviving the quiet, private corridors. They understand the value of a whisper over a command. They value history and tradition above the new modern rules. They believe they own the keys to the castle. Catherine is a threat to that old belief. This is not just a disagreement between two women. It is a war of ideologies for the future. The monarchy can only survive with one clear vision. Catherine wants a lean, efficient, and modern institution. The others prefer the comfortable chaos of the past. One must eventually bow to the other now. But Catherine is not alone. She has support and backing from many. William stands firmly by his wife in this struggle. He sees the efficiency and the logic she brings. He also knows the cost of the old way. He grew up watching the damage that created. He lost his mother and a relationship with his father in that process. He will not let those patterns repeat today. He provides the shield for her sharp sword. The air in the private quarters is often tense. No one speaks about the Cold War out loud, but everyone sees the shifting power in every room. The staff moves quietly to avoid the crossfire. They know that a storm is brewing inside. One wrong step could cost them everything. This environment is what led to the Banquet Meltdown. It was not a sudden burst of random anger. It was the result of years of mounting frustration. Catherine was finally done with the silent, subtle games. She decided to draw a line in the sand. That line was the table in the dining room. Everything about that night was meant to be a statement. She chose a moment where all eyes were fixed. She knew the impact her choice would leave behind. It was a surgical strike against the status quo. She proved she was the master of the house. The message was sent loud and clear. The guests were terrified of the sudden, sharp shift. They were not prepared for such a public display. They expected the usual polished royal veneer to hold. Instead, they saw the raw, pulsing heart of the conflict. It was a terrifying look into the royal rift. Everyone left with a secret they had to hold. Now the foundation of the palace feels truly cracked. No one can pretend the peace still exists today. The lines are drawn in permanent dark ink now. Every person is forced to choose a single side. The silence is no longer a sign of peace. It is a countdown to the next big move. But what was the catalyst that pushed her this far? What happened in the weeks leading up to the dinner? Did someone cross a line that could never be forgiven? We are going to look at the hidden events. You will see what really started the final countdown. The uninvited catalyst. Laura Lopez walked into the stateroom like a ghost from a past that refused to fade away. She was not invited by the Princess of Wales to this specific dinner. She arrived because her mother insisted on the presence of her own inner circle. The air in the room changed the moment she crossed the gilded threshold. It was a cold and calculated move by a camp that felt entitled to the space. Catherine watched from across the room, with a look that told the entire story. This was not a simple social visit or a polite family gathering for the cameras. It was a power play designed to test the limits of the new royal order. Laura had spent years operating in the quiet, shadowed corners of the royal institution. She knew exactly how to survive the space without ever drawing direct attention. Her presence at the banquet was a deliberate signal to those who were watching. It was a clear breach of the unspoken protocol that Catherine had fought to establish. The friction between these women had been simmering under the surface for a very long time. It was a conflict born of competing visions for the future of the crown. Catherine wanted a lean and modern monarchy that focused on duty and efficiency. The older guard viewed this approach as a direct threat to their long-standing influence. They preferred the old ways and the comfortable, soft power they had wielded for decades. Every encounter was a quiet battlefield where only the most observant could see the blades. Was this truly a calculated power play by the Queen, or was it a mistake that blew up in everyone's faces? This is the core question that still haunts the halls of Windsor today. Perhaps the intention was to signal strength and continuity to the skeptical public. Instead, it ignited a fire that no one in the room was prepared to extinguish. The timing of this arrival could not have been more volatile for the family. It turned a private dinner into a dangerous gamble for everyone involved. The subtle insults were not caught by the cameras, but they were felt by every guest. They passed like icy daggers across the table during the first course. No one dared to look directly at the tension that was thickening in the air. A whisper here and a sharp look there served as the weapons of choice. The guests knew that the decorum of the palace was hanging by a single thread. It was a game of chess played in a room filled with people who knew the rules all too well. You have to wonder why this specific guest list was so carefully curated by the older guard. They knew exactly how Catherine would react to this unexpected and uninvited arrival. It seemed like a trap, set with the precision of a master hunter in the woods. They wanted to see the princess break her composure in front of the most important guests. If she snapped, it would be the perfect moment to label her as the aggressor. She was expected to act as the villain in a story they had already written. The pressure of recent royal health crises had only made the situation more fragile than before. Everyone was on edge and waiting for the next disaster to break the peace. The stability of the monarchy felt like a fragile vase that was about to shatter. Laura Lopez was the catalyst that brought all of this hidden resentment to a boiling point. She stood there as the focal point of a drama that felt centuries in the making. The guests watched her with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The silence grew heavy and suffocating as the meal proceeded without a single genuine word. People ate their food with mechanical movements while avoiding eye contact with their neighbors. It was clear that the evening was heading toward a point of no return. You could see the storm building in the way the security staff moved through the room. They sensed the shift in the power dynamic before anyone else even realized it. This was the moment where the internal war finally became impossible to ignore. But what did Catherine say in those final, critical minutes before she stood up? What secret words pushed her over the edge and into the history books? We are going to look at the exact demand that stopped the music and silenced the room. The events that followed that moment changed the trajectory of the monarchy forever. The demand that stopped the music. The tension reached its absolute breaking point that evening. Every single guest felt the air thin out in the stateroom. The soft laughter died away completely in the heavy silence. Nobody dared to take a sip of wine from their glass. The silence became a physical weight upon the entire room. It felt as if time had suddenly stopped moving for everyone. Catherine did not look at the king during this moment. She kept her focus entirely on her target across the room. Her eyes were as hard and cold as polished stone. She did not even blink once during the long standoff. She radiated a power that was truly terrifying to the guests. It was a sight that stunned every single person watching her. She slowly pushed her chair back from the table with force. The sharp scrape of wood against stone sounded like loud thunder. It made everyone jump in their seats in sudden fear. She stood up with a deliberate and very regal grace. She seemed to grow in height as she rose up tall. Her presence dominated the entire dining room in that moment. All heads turned toward her, in perfect synchronized unison now. No one dared to look away from her for a second. The atmosphere turned electric with a sense of hidden, burning fury. She walked toward the end of the long mahogany table. Every step was measured and very precise on the floor. She looked like a general commanding a tense, bloody battlefield. She finally reached the chair where Laura sat quite still. The guests held their breath in nervous anticipation of the end. You could feel the hearts pounding throughout the crowded room. It was a moment of pure, raw, and unfiltered drama. The security staff tensed up behind the long, white line. They knew exactly what was about to happen next for them. She leaned down to whisper a command in her ear. Her face remained a perfect, unmoving mask of cold stone. No one heard the exact words that were spoken there, yet the impact was instant and quite profound for everyone. Laura went deathly pale at the sudden, sharp comment today. It was a sentence that changed the power structure forever. Catherine stood straight up and looked at the waiting guards. Her hand pointed toward the heavy doors at the back. The signal was unmistakable to everyone in the grand room. It was a command that brooked no argument from anyone. The security team moved with surprising and very intense speed. They converged on the spot with a sense of focus. Camilla watched the entire scene in a state of horror. She opened her mouth to say something sharp and defensive, but no sound came out of her dry, tight throat. She looked at her daughter with a sense of panic. The power structure had shifted in just one single breath. She realized she had lost the total control she sought. The king watched the scene with a very heavy heart. He knew that any intervention would be a huge mistake. He felt the eyes of the guests on his face. He decided to remain still and say absolutely nothing now. It was a choice that cost him everything that night. He became a silent witness to the complete political carnage. Laura Lopez finally stood up from her chair in silence. She tried to regain her lost, fragile composure right now, but her hands shook as she grabbed her silk bag. The humiliation was clear for all the guests to see. She did not dare to fight the royal security guards. She walked with them toward the grand wooden exit. The room was completely silent as she walked far away. The only sound was the click of her high heels. It echoed off the high walls of the grand room. Every guest stared down at their own plate of food. Nobody wanted to witness the shame of the public exit. It was a moment of total and utter royal collapse. The heavy doors opened with a loud and deep creak. She vanished into the dark, cold hallway far beyond them. The guards stepped out to follow her out very quickly. Then the doors slammed shut with a very hard bang. The sound shook the very bones of the dining room. The ordeal was over, for the time being at least. Catherine returned to her seat with very steady, calm movements. She adjusted her dress with her calm and graceful hands. It was as if nothing had ever happened to her. She looked at her guests with a cold, sharp smile. The message was delivered to every single person there now. She remained the master of the house for the night. The meal continued in a state of absolute total shock. People moved like ghosts through the rest of the dinner. They were terrified of the new and very ruthless dynamic. They knew that the world had changed tonight in Windsor. The palace would never be the same again after this. A new, harder order had risen from the ashes today. The Windsor standoff. The king remained frozen in his seat as the doors slammed shut. He looked at the empty space where his guest had been sitting just seconds before. The air in the room felt thin and impossible to breathe. He knew that any move he made would be a massive mistake. He chose to stay still and stare at his own cold plate. Camilla sat beside him in a state of absolute visible shock. She looked at the closed doors with eyes wide and filled with fear. Her hands trembled as they rested on the white linen tablecloth. She tried to find the right words to say, but her throat was tight. The power dynamic in the room had shifted into something entirely new. The guests watched this scene unfold with a sense of pure, unadulterated terror. They were trapped inside the stateroom with no way to exit. The security team had locked the doors from the outside to ensure total privacy. No one dared to check their phones or whisper to their neighbor. The silence became a physical weight that pressed down on every single person. Catherine remained perfectly calm as she looked across the long mahogany table. She did not look at the king or at the empty abandoned chair. She simply picked up her wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. Her expression was a mask of cold, calculated, and absolute royal steel. It was clear to everyone present that she was now running this house. The security guards moved through the hallways with a new, intense level of purpose. They were no longer just observers of the event, but enforcers of a new law. Every move they made was calculated to keep the palace under strict and total control. The staff kept their heads down as they walked past the closed dining room doors. They knew that a storm had broken and that they were all in its path. The king finally broke his long silence with a heavy, pained exhale of breath. He looked toward the head of the table, where his daughter-in-law sat in wait. He realized in that moment that his old ways of managing the court were over. The modern, sharper order had finally arrived to take its place. He decided to say nothing because he knew that he had lost the argument tonight. The room felt smaller and much more dangerous than it had just an hour before. Every guest knew they were witnessing a moment that would change the history of the monarchy. They were all holding secrets that they would have to carry out of the building. The sense of stability they had expected from the night was completely shattered. There was no going back to the way things were before the dinner began. The tension continued to build as the clock ticked forward on the palace wall. No one was permitted to leave their seat until the security team gave the clear signal. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the sharp sting of cold fear. Every person in that room was a silent witness to a very public and brutal collapse. It was a scene of political carnage that would haunt the palace halls for a long time. The king slowly stood up from his chair in the middle of the room. He walked toward the exit with a stiff, heavy, and very measured stride. Camilla followed him closely as she looked back at the empty ruined table once more. She knew that her influence had been dealt a blow from which it might never recover. The doors opened for them, and they walked out into the cold, dark, and lonely hallway. The guests were finally allowed to stand up and exit the grand, suffocating room. They moved in silence as they walked toward the exit of the palace grounds. No one spoke a word to each other as they hurried to their waiting cars. The night was over, but the damage to the crown was just starting to show. The palace would never be the same after the events of this dark, cold night. The lasting scar on the royal fabric. The doors finally clicked shut behind the last of the guests. A heavy silence settled over the Windsor staterooms. The lingering scent of cold fear remained in the air. The staff moved like shadows to clean the mess. They knew the world had changed forever tonight. No one dared to speak a word of what they saw. The palace press office went into absolute overdrive the next morning. They scrambled to contain the rumors that were already spreading like wildfire. Official statements were issued with cold and measured corporate language. They denied the severity of the incident with practiced royal ease, but the cracks in the stone walls were already far too deep. The public could sense that something had truly broken inside the house. News began to leak out through the most trusted channels in the city. Whispers of a royal meltdown started to dominate every single headline. Critics argued that the monarchy had finally shown its true, ugly face. Supporters tried to maintain that everything was normal and under full control. It was a chaotic battle for the narrative of the modern crown. The institution was fighting for its survival on a very public stage. The king found himself in an impossible position following that dark night. He was forced to choose between the woman he loved and the future of his own house. The palace halls felt colder than they had ever felt in his entire life. Every single step he took was monitored by his own staff. He was a prisoner in a castle of his own making. The weight of his crown had never felt quite this heavy before. Catherine emerged from the ordeal with a new and terrifying level of authority. She had proven that she was not just a figurehead for the press. She had asserted control in the most brutal and public way possible. The court began to shift its loyalty toward her ironclad, modern standard. The old guard was on the run and had nowhere left to hide. She had successfully redefined what it meant to lead the firm. This was not a singular event that would simply fade away with time. It was the spark that ignited a fire that would burn for years. The relationship between the two camps was now permanently and violently severed. There could be no return to the soft, comfortable compromises of the past. A new, harder order had officially taken its place in the palace. The monarchy had been forced to evolve in the most painful way. We are left with so many questions about the true nature of that night. Did the Princess of Wales know exactly how this would all play out? Was the removal of the guest a calculated move to strengthen her own power? Or was it a moment of raw, human emotion that slipped past her guard? The truth remains buried under layers of palace protection and carefully crafted secrets. We may never know exactly what was whispered in that final, critical moment. The footage of the event has been scrubbed from every official archive. Security tapes were seized and destroyed within hours of the dinner ending. Only the guests and the staff know the full scope of what transpired. Their silence has been bought with threats and binding legal agreements of secrecy. The mystery of the Windsor banquet remains one of the most guarded tales today. It is a puzzle that keeps the public endlessly fascinated by the royal drama. Perhaps the real story is not about who was right or who was wrong. It is about the sheer fragility of an institution built on ancient, crumbling traditions. The modern world demands a level of transparency that the palace cannot provide. This conflict is just a symptom of a much larger, global tension. The monarchy is standing on a precipice and looking down into the dark abyss. One more slip like this could change the history of the nation. The dust is finally settling on the events of that fateful night at Windsor. We are left to wonder if the monarchy can ever truly recover from this fracture. The questions we have raised today are just the tip of a much larger, darker iceberg. History will remember this moment as the turning point for a new, colder order. You have heard the facts and seen the tension, but the real story is still unfolding behind closed doors.